Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. And folks, in all due respect, welcome aboard. Hope you had a good 4th of July. And I'm sure everything is very, very easy on the pandemic. And the idea is that we're going to be focusing on Portland this time around. Again, we're going to talk about issues that are relevant to who we are here in the city of Portland. One, we're going to give you an update from folks who are here in the area, an update on the whole issue of protesting here downtown and in the city of Portland, and any other issues along that particular line. And then we're going to take a short break, and we're going to talk about the whole issue of statues. And that's going to be an interesting one in the second half of the show. And I think you'll enjoy that aspect of it too. So just sit back and relax, and we're just going to jump right on into the show. Joining me on the, and all characters will be here, some of which will be just observing. If they want to comment, they can also do. But the folks who are going to be joining me today, folks, you got Jack Kerford. You've seen Jack before. Jack, who was running for city council, have him on. The idea is that he's still there. They still haven't gotten a runoff yet, so we don't know who's going to be sitting in that seat. So right now we got several folks who are still basically involved in the process. I picked Jack because I figured he's been very, very involved. He's knocked on a lot of doors and et cetera. So Jack Kerford's going to be on. Another entity that's been around has been Patrick. It's Patrick Stupel. There he is. You can see him there. There's General Pat. Anyway, Patrick has been very, very involved. He knows exactly. In fact, he's got his dog tags on. I know he's there. I know he's the man. So bottom line is that he's been around. He knows what these lanes are all about, downtown and elsewhere and whatever, young man and whatever, and that's what it's all about. Okay, good. And then we got Brady on another end. Brady's basically from the same. Where's that?
I was just saying hi.
Hi, Jay. Okay, got Brady on, and Brady's basically again too. He's very familiar with downtown. You'll only hear his voice as opposed to his photo, but we'll get that photo. He's been on the show. He's been on Voters Digest before. So we've got Brady, he's going to be on. And we've got Cliff Walker. And Cliff Walker is a local, very, 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 very much involved here in the community. And by the way, he's former military, like Dak is and myself and whatever. And I'm recruiting Brady and Patrick. And we're already in. And they've got their sergeant stripes right now, right up front. So now you've got the characters. And so why don't we just jump right on in here, and we're just going to go on and get Patrick to get us on board, Patrick. Give us the lay of the land on the whole issue of protesting. And you can start wherever you want to, from the standpoint when we first got involved in the process, and more particularly downtown. That's basically what most people are interested in, the whole idea of the so-called vandalism, the folks who are protesting, and I can go on and on and on. The Justice Center. I mean, just take it wherever you want to take it, okay? Let's go. Let's start with you.
Well, Bruce, I want to thank you and everybody at Oregon Voters Digest, especially the people who work the magic behind the scenes. I want to really harp on that in America these days and around the world. There's a lot of people in our communities that are essential workers and non-essential. Well, let's give a shout out to all workers, because there's a lot of people who never get enough thanks, from janitors to, people who pick up your trash to street sweepers, all sorts of professions, and that includes everybody at Oregon Voters Digest. Shout out to Steve. You make the magic happen, so thank you for that. As far as the lay of the land and current events, Portland, Oregon, as usual, depending on how you look at it through your paradigm, it's either a progressive utopia or a national laughingstock. But it's just because we are perennial protesters as a city. We find reasons to protest and gather our collective angst all the time. So it's nothing new for people who lived in Portland or follow Portland politics for a long time. But there are a lot of different influences that we haven't seen before. And there's a lot of rhetoric, but rhetoric's one thing. What I'm concerned about is the vandalism and the violence. I used to be, well, actually, I'll just start here. I'm from Felony Flats. I used to be a skater punk and kind of an anarcho-capitalist, for people who understand what that is as a libertarian. So I understand what a lot of these young guys, young kids feel. And there's not even a lot of young, there's even people who are not young, elders who are rightfully angry and want to break things. It's just, I'm not a violent person myself. I used to be a really kind of irritated skater punk when I was younger. But luckily, I went to military high school, and that's one of my dog tags right here. The other is my grandfather's from World War II when he was jumping out of the planes and Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and all that stuff. But I got a second chance out of Felony Flats. I very easily could have ended up in the prison system because if somebody looked at me the wrong way or pissed me off, well, I might slash their tires, or that might be the least of it. It was pretty bad. I had a lot of righteous indignation in my mind, so I thought. But I was always a good kid. But the problem is, I saw that that was ridiculous at a young age, and I went to military school, and I got a second chance. And ever since then, I got into politics at a young age. I knew that prison reform was something that we needed to have, because if I, as a white guy in Felony Flats, had been profiled by cops for being a skater punk, then by God, I can only imagine what it's like for a person of color in a place like Felony Flats or anywhere in this country. There's a lot of closet racism, and as a white guy, I understand that. I really do. It's why drug use is about the same statistically between African Americans and white people, but yet 2 out of 3 African Americans, or I forget the statistic, but it's like 2/3 more African Americans get charged. So there is statistically like measurable racism. It's just hard to boil it down to your local level and who's racist right now when, because nobody wants to be called a racist. And that's really a lot of the drama right now that's going on. There's a lot of race relation problems in America. There is a massive divide. It's like a canyon that's ever growing bigger, all because people like to bicker. But I tell people they need to stop and think before they want to bicker, because the politicians, they want us to bicker. It's divide and conquer. So speaking of Felony Flats, I'm here in the heart of nature at Lentz Park, and it's actually beautiful. I like to kind of actually be in nature because it calms my anxiety, and it really helps me kind of think about what's really important in life. A lot of us are stuck in our cubicles, our cookie cutter lifestyle, our consumerism, if you will. And I find that rather problematic because we've lost touch with what brings us together. And well, nature is one of the best things that can bring people together outside of food. And that's going to lead me into my next point. There was a barbecue on the 4th of July in front of the Justice Center, and it was peaceful and awesome. We had a former elder, a Black Panther from back in the day. He was there with a barbecue, sponsored the whole thing, a free cookout, kitty corner from the federal building or something like that. And it was amazing because we were literally breaking bread. I was talking to a gentleman, and I have all these videos on my Facebook and my YouTube, and they're going to blow people's minds because you'll see the contrast between the craziness and the violence and the amazing solidarity and unity and peaceful moments as well. And I want to talk about this barbecue real quick before we segue into what do you guys want to talk about, because there was a peaceful moment, an amazing peaceful moment, where I said, hey, let's break bread, come eat, let's have a cookout. We don't have to fight. There doesn't have to be tear gas in the streets and dogs sicked on black people. Like, what is this, a rerun of the Selma Bridge? What are you guys thinking? But that didn't actually go over very well, because after we literally pulled bread off the grill and was breaking garlic bread and cheersing bread together, the cops shot at us and tear gassed the barbecue with peaceful protesters. And that's the point. There was one crazy white guy who agitated the police like 50 yards away from us, but it happened to be in the trajectory line of fire of the barbecue. So we're all over here saying, hey, please take your crazy insanity away from this, bipartisan black cookout. We're just trying to have a good time and have peaceful barbecue. And some crazy white person wants to agitate and then gets all of us tear gassed. It took one person to get us shot at. We got charged 5 times in one night. They would move up and like tear gas us and intimidate us and like they would storm us like linebackers and like they would stop like a wall of Spartans barking at us. It was terrifying. But Bruce, you know me. I went
Yep.
to military school. So
Yep.
you can bark at me all you want. You can't scare me. I'm immune to that. I went through that. So we held down the barbecue, and I defended the brother from all the possible tear gas. I put my body in front of him because I'm not going to have an elderly black man getting shot at. And also, by the way, there's coronavirus that we have to worry about, which the black community is affected more than the white community. So there's so many problems and so many reasons why people are marching. But the problem is there's violent people in the mix that are, I don't know if people are going to like me. People might hate me for saying this, but there's some crazy ass violent white people, excuse my language, that are causing problems for the Black Lives Matter movement. It's very problematic when we want to talk about a racist terrorist attack, the Jeremy Christian Max stabbing, and then we want to do a peaceful march about that with black pastors and people who are stabbed in the neck, but all of a sudden it takes one person to screw up the entire narrative. So there's a lot of violent people. They're destroying statues. They're throwing balloons with dog poop, or it might be even human feces. I don't know. I can't imagine who would want to spend their time with their life filling a balloon with their own human feces, but crazier things have happened. So yeah, there's people throwing balloons of feces at police, throwing mortars, as I call bombs, because it's like a exploding device. People throwing bombs at the Justice Center. And I'm not one to tone police people's anger. I know why they're mad. I've been profiled myself, not as much as a black person. But it's just like, that's what the police state wants us to do. If a police state wants to increase their power, the best thing that could happen for them is a narrative that says there's crazy people throwing bombs at our building. So we need that LRAD. We need that armored tank personnel carrier because they're throwing bombs at us. So if we want to stop the police state and militarize police, we have to think long game and pragmatic. We have to look at the situation for what it is. We have to encourage the peaceful black barbecues and discourage crazy white people throwing bombs at police. That's just kind of insane. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, there's a lot of collective angst about the statue. I know that some people don't like me talking about it, but I've worked in progressive politics for a long time. I have my accolades, and I'm going to speak on this. It was an elk. It was an animal. I have never heard of an elk being a slave owner. Have you, Bruce?
No, I
So
haven't.
I don't understand why they tore it down.
Interesting. Is that your layout for a minute?
That's all I have to say for now. Yeah.
Okay, good for now. Okay, good. Let's get Brady in here real quick. Brady, you got a couple of comments in regards to what you feel about the downtown issues and whatever?
Sure. I guess I can speak a little bit on that. Yeah. I haven't been down there as much as Patrick lately because, the virus is going crazy in America. But, that elk statue is definitely kind of contentious one way or the other, because it seems like in the past 4 or so years, that elk statue has been vandalized nearly every single time. And yeah, it's like every major protest that breaks out, that statue gets vandalized. So I don't know if I really want to condemn all of the vandalism, because people, I think, have taken notice that some of the vandalism is meaningful, like the George Floyd mural outside of the Apple Store. That stuff is kind of beautiful. The
Absolutely.
violence.
I met some of the artists. They're great.
Well,
Nice. The violence, it's, first off, it's a protest about police brutality and excessive force and their violence. And I believe somebody at one point in time said violence breeds violence. But I'm also going to make the point that racism, fascism, whatever you want to call it, they're not going to play by the rules of pragmatic, sit down at a barbecue and let's talk about things. That doesn't happen. We do have racists and self-avowed neo-Nazis in the police bureau. That is a thing. There is one guy, I believe, I don't remember his name, but he's part of the forensic division in our police bureau who's just like this open neo-Nazi. So I don't know what our
Wow.
police union really thinks about that, but we do have, one guy at the center of the police union. And typically how I think about a police union is that people talk to each other, they voice opinions and dissent, and they get stuff done. If they don't want to see that in their police bureau, why haven't they outed him? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Maybe somebody here does. I would like to see more barbecues, but in your video, Patrick, there was a ricocheted bullet, and I told you,
hit.
I was actually after I left.
I got hit by
I
one
told
of
you
those.
guys to watch those marshals.
I got shot
Those
in the
guys were
ankle.
really aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I got shot by one of those in the ankle while I was at the barbecue. It was crazy.
So, love or hate the riots, I think the most pragmatic way you can really think about it is that they're actually exposing nearly every single time a riot breaks out, the police brutality at play. It's a logical paradox. So I don't know what more I can really say on the issue. Some of the vandalism too, I guess you could call it, I call it petty vandalism, is used as a networking opportunity. I've seen stickers with QR codes, with links to, promote artists and all that sort of stuff. So it's not all bad. At least not
The
in my
Boston
book.
Tea Party, we have to remember the Boston Tea Party was
Yeah.
vandalism as well. So it's kind of how you look at the lens of things,
Boycott activism, that
Well,
sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I speak a little on
Yeah,
this
please do. Yeah.
topic?
Hey, go on. What's up? What's up, Cliff?
Oh, well, one person's violence is another person's duty. And I think we have to understand that when we start looking at the role models for tearing down statues, we just have to look at our military. The boys who were over in, was it Baghdad, taking down the statue of, was it Saddam Hussein? Now, if
Yes,
the
sir.
military is leading the statue taking down movement in the world, what are they telling us? There is an appropriate time to act. And I think that's what we have to decide. Are we going to continue to stand by, or are we going to act? I know
Sure.
action isn't always beautiful, but sometimes it gets the job done.
Thank you for saying that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Zach, what do you think so far?
Well, I think he makes a great point. And I want to blend two different narratives and paradigms and political worlds, if you will, together. When the white people called the Bundys took over the Malheur Refuge in 2016, and they wanted to stop Uranium One, they took guns to a refuge and said, it was a prison reform issue, by the way. So they took a refuge because they didn't want Dwight and Stephen Hammond to be imprisoned for double jeopardy. And so they went out to Eastern Oregon and they took over a federal refuge. Well, it wasn't just a prison reform issue for double jeopardy mandatory minimum sentencing. It was an opportunity that Kate Brown could have actually made something amazing happen. She could have shook hands with conservatives on the issue, and she could have actually pushed the needle on a historically progressive issue. I know this because I worked in Salem on prison reform for many years before the refuge standoff happened. So when the standoff happened, I got on the phone immediately to all sorts of progressive legislators and even the governor's staff. I said, y'all need to get Kate Brown to shake hands with these guys right now. I know it sounds crazy because they have guns, but they're not racist because they're actually asking black people to come to the refuge. They're asking Native Americans, and they had black people and Native elders at the refuge. But the fake news divided everyone, and it was truly a prison reform issue. We could have got conservative buy-in. We could have had a shaking of hands on something we've had a log jam in the legislature for years, but there was a narrative problem. So, the question is, when do we act? And the black community right now is getting pigeonholed and kind of gaslit because, we need to act, but you can't do that or this. Like, there's tone policing. I mean, I kind of just did that a little bit, like kind of condemning a little bit of the violence. So my thing is, I think all sides need to talk together. I think we need to have the Ammon Bundys of the world shake hands with Black Lives Matter. I'm crazy enough to believe that they would actually do that and actually supply the beef for the barbecue because, wait a second, isn't Ammon Bundy a rancher? Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
he is.
he's a rancher. So my thing is, I think that was a wonderful point when he said the military tore down the statues, but yet our civilians are not allowed to. I hadn't thought of that before myself, but that's a really good frame of thinking about it. So my point is, sometimes all it really takes is for us to take off our glasses and put on someone else's. We got to see through different people's perspectives and lenses. When we do that and we have radical solidarity on the issues, we can change the world. Can you imagine what it would be like to have gun-toting conservatives who are anti-police state shaking hands with Black Panthers on MLK at a barbecue where they supplied the beef and the pastors cooked, or however it works? That would be amazing. Kate Brown would be terrified because both sides are coming together against her on issues we can solve. But anyways, didn't mean to interrupt though.
Let me throw this out there, Jackman. You can in fact follow right on in there with regards. What about Ted Wheeler? Where is he in all this issue?
Well, Ted Wheeler caused a racist terrorist attack, and I don't understand how he's even still in office. The Jeremy Christian Max Train stabbing that happened 3 years ago, where I was threatened, and sadly I was a prophet. Nothing happened when I was threatened, and then he kills people. So that was cool. That was fun. I have PTSD from that for life. Yeah, it's great. I love it. But nobody knows that story because I wasn't stabbed in the neck, and I don't really pull clout because I'm lucky. I survived. I didn't even get stabbed, but he wanted to kill me for a month, and I was terrified. So Ted Wheeler, I don't know how he's in office still, for one, but we have been talking about it. I've been there since the first night of the protest every single day. I was gone for about a week. Like 2 weeks ago, I was gone for a week, but I've been there almost every day for like a month and a half. And I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people. And every conversation I have, it's about the Jeremy Christian Max stabbing, because everybody's downtown chanting, excuse my language, but F Ted Wheeler, F Ted Wheeler. 10,000 people at one point, like about a month ago, there was 10,000 people strong chanting F Ted Wheeler, and the news will never report it. So my conversations naturally were, I hear you chanting F Ted Wheeler. Did you know he caused a racist stabbing? As police commissioner, he let Jeremy Christian threaten me and ultimately stab people to death, but he's gassing us peaceful protesters and shooting us in the head for no reason. How do you feel about that? And it immediately gets people irate. And I'm like, how would you like to march on the mayor's house? Hashtag march on the mayor's mansion. And that's why we actually saw the occupation of Ted Wheeler's house. I was gone for a week when that happened, but a lot of people who I'd met leading up to that protest have, in retrospect, said, Patrick, oh my God, I was looking for you at the occupation of his house. We made it happen. You totally called it. And I'm like, I don't need the clout. It's an organic movement. I just plant the seeds and let people make the change they want to see in the world. So my main point about Ted Wheeler is that he caused a racist stabbing. Everybody from the stabbing victim to the pastor Manyweather, whose granddaughter was on the train, all of those people have been out protesting at the Justice Center. On the 4th of July, Micah Fletcher was rapping. Yeah, he got stabbed in the neck, but he was rapping in front of the Justice Center not about the Max stabbing, but the main point is, a lot of people want to march on the mayor's house again. And we got to be careful, because I don't want a bunch of people in the Pearl District, elderly people, families, mothers, and children, to be scared. I don't want that. I would love to have a peaceful, barbecue in front of Ted's house every weekend until November, reminding people he caused a stabbing. I do believe that once that resonates, he will resign. And I kind of think the guy who exposed that, Bruce Broussard, should naturally be the first Black mayor in the whitest city in America. In contrast, what do you guys think?
I think it's a good idea. but like I said, we're there. We're there. And in fact, that's with all due respect, folks. That's why we're doing the show today, because we want to make sure that we understand that we're in Portland, Oregon, and we're just as serious about this situation as well. And we do not have the violency that as far as being portrayed nationwide. And I thought this is why we needed to have this show, invite some of the young folks that are on, who basically it's their lane, and they've got that background, and I'm very familiar with it because I'm very active with them from the standpoint of giving them the opportunity to communicate. That's why we're doing it at this point in time. We've got a couple more minutes or whatever, and let's bring Jack Fulford in. Jack, how you doing? What do you think so far?
Well, unfortunately,
Thanks very much, Patrick.
One of my concerns is when I've only been in Oregon, my wife and I moved here in 2011. is I came here with a paradigm of Oregon being a very progressive, forward-thinking state. And I hear a lot of words, but the actual action and implementation on the key issues, I see very little movement, and I'm very disappointed with that. If we're talking about a full suite of issues at hand, it's more than Black Lives Matter from a police standpoint. It goes all the way from schools itself and how we treat children in schools, all the way to prison reform. And that's a very broad series of issues, but they're all interdependent and they're all related. And we must bring them together. If we're really going to talk about social justice, we have to bring about full integrated system. At the same time, I am deeply concerned by the polarizing hate that I see by extremists on the left and probably on the well, definitely on the far right, but also even to a degree on the far left. We have to break down these barriers. As we made progress way back in the 60s, not enough, that was a start of progress. And then we sort of plateaued, and then there was some subversive movements that started institutionalizing or trying to rewrite history about the Confederacy and about the Ku Klux Klan and about white supremacy. We've got to eradicate that and correct history. Starting is to eliminate the Confederate flag and to eliminate the Confederate flag from the Mississippi state flag. That's a start. But it also goes beyond that. I mean, I'm still appalled that we have a national football team called the Redskins. I mean, that would be like calling them the blackface. My grandmother was Native. And when I was in high school, I was told by two teachers that my kind, being Native, shouldn't go to university because my kind should go and do the technical school or something like that. So regardless of the fact that I was a National Merit Scholar, that was their perception. So it took me a while to earn enough money to get through university with the GI Bill, but I was able to do that. But the path for many, particularly those with dark skin, is much harder, and the probability of being sidetracked in life and being given no opportunity for development is significantly greater for people of color. And that has to change. So it's time. Look, I support the movement. I don't support the violence because there are people of color downtown that have businesses, both Blacks, Asians, Latinos, and they are hurting those people. And for that reason, I don't support them. But at the same time, the peaceful marches that I see, absolutely. That's what Reverend King did and made tremendous strides. There were other approaches that were not as successful. So as a scientist by my background, I look at analogs that work. And the question is, how do we make change that's really lasting and not just talk about it in Oregon? It's time we make real change happen.
Great, Jack. Good job. Look like we're nearing the end for this part of the show. Again, we'll thank you very much for being with us. We're going to take about a 10-minute break or whatever, and we'll be right back with you. Bye. Welcome back, folks, to Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the show, and if you haven't, you can get it back on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, okay? And now we got to get into the second half of the show, and what we're going to feature this time around, we're going to talk something here locally in the Portland area, the whole issue with the statue at Jefferson High School, okay? And we're fortunate to have one of the guys who basically got involved with this issue, besides being a graduate, of Jefferson High School, going to kind of just lead us into this conversation with Jefferson High School and the whole issue of the statue. Okay, with that, we've got Cliff Walker, but again, the same crew is going to be here with me. That's Patrick. Patrick's not going to be around. But anyway, we got Jack Herford, and we've got Brady sitting on the other end, and we got Cliff Walker, who's going to take us into the lead, and then we'll just kind of, if we have time, we'll just get in and ask a few questions from the other guys that are there. Okay, Cliff, you're on. Can we go? We're going on with you.
Well,
Jefferson High School, Mr. Cliff Walker.
well, let me give you. I'm a Portland native, and Jefferson was a high school that I was, ordered to go to. Out of what we used to call it grade school. You go 8 years in grade school, and then you go to a high school. And the high school that I went to was called Jefferson High School, and it was just a couple of blocks from my home, my house. So it has an interesting history. My house is in an area where Blacks were not welcomed. And so, but to have a high school named after a racist may have been part of the bigger plan. I'm not sure. But when you grow up in a neighborhood where a high school is named after a racist and somebody that didn't respect the humanity of Black people, you become aware that it influences your whole community when you have a memorial to a white supremacist. And I was always bothered by that once I learned the true story about Thomas Jefferson and read his writings and what he professed about people of color. And he was a slave trafficker, but that was his profession, his business. and to use a slave trafficker of Africans as a role model for the school just seemed inappropriate, and been dealing with that ever since. So that's my passion about symbols, and having gone to a school that represented something that I was offended by. And that's the issue. I guess everybody gets offended at a different level. And many people are offended by bronze statues of slave traffickers and racists. And that's who Thomas Jefferson was. Does that help?
Oh yes, fine.
Yeah.
So why don't we just get into when did you get involved with the whole issue of the statue and began your quest?
Well, I would say that probably started once I joined the military and found out Black military men were not given the full respect that I thought they were due. And
Okay.
And I guess that's when I was in San Antonio, Texas, training. And San Antonio was like the big town next to the base. So if you ever went off base, you went to San Antonio. But when you went into San Antonio, I learned that the airmen, the Black airmen were being treated differently than the white airmen as they came into San Antonio. And I realized right then that we needed to be fighting in Texas, instead of getting ready to go over to Vietnam. And I've taken these issues with me all my life about the disparities and the unfair treatment of people of color.
Okay.
And like I said, where does it start? You're born into it.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm a little disappointed that when I was younger, there was a coin. It was a nickel, and we call it an Indian head nickel. And on the other side of it was a buffalo. But just having the face of a composite of these three Native American chiefs on a nickel made me learn to respect the profile of Native Americans, because it was good for a popsicle or something, And then I realized that who else is on the money? And then I started realizing there were a whole lot of racists and slave traders' faces. And when you're putting billions of images into our economy and in our pockets, in our change, we're dealing with a nation that deals in a currency of profiles of racists and oppressors of Black people. And I just said, well, we got a lot of work to do to get this neighborhood or this country in a place where it's comfortable for everybody. And it'll never be comfortable for people who, if the most images they see are people who historically oppressed Black people, you know, and that's I got into it because I think there's work to be done. I just don't think it's right.
Okay.
It's, you know, and I was talking to the other brother who was telling me that he didn't realize how much racism was in Portland when he came here. And I was going to tell him, I do a little bit of history, and I learned that the Grand Dragon of the Oregon Clan was employed by Multnomah County Courthouse as a bailiff. So that's how pervasive and how deep-seated racists are in our community. They're getting paid on the county payroll.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Cliff, if you can remember, I interviewed you years back on the whole issue of Jefferson High School and naturally the whole issue of the sister city, Zimbabwe, whatever. And we talked a little bit about the whole issue of the statue there at Jefferson High School a bit. And again, for those who are looking at it, you can catch that in my archives. But in this particular case, at this point in time, some issues have been brought up of late here in the whole issue of the protesting and things of that, Black Lives Matter and whatever. And so naturally Jefferson came up. And in fact, came up so such that the president even made a point about the Washington Monument and also the Jefferson Monument just recently. And we are part of that. And as a result of that, we are associated with that. And many folks around the country, and especially here, are trying to figure, well, why us? You know what I mean? That routine. So that's why it was so important to have you on to share, if you will, with us all, including the president and anyone else. It's about communication. It's having, excuse the French, it's having another barbecue. We're having another barbecue. Okay, you got me?
If you got a good point and you want me to support you, let me know what it is. And if I see it being reasonable, you know, and it's something that I am convinced to support, I'll do it. And I think that's where we're at in this nation. We don't know as a nation, what we should support. I mean, I go to the flag, and every time I see those 13 alternating stripes on the American flag, I know that is a symbol for the oppression of Black people. Now, I know a lot of people don't understand that, but those 13 colonies all agreed. That's why they're united, to oppress Black people and import slaves and chase the brothers who didn't want to be slaves and bring them back. That's what those 13 stripes we see on the flag stand for originally. So symbols are important. We need to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, again, I want you to come back. I want to get to Jefferson right now. You know, you were going to Jefferson High School.
Okay.
And then you graduated from Jefferson, whatever. And then you brought up the issue of the statue. Living in Portland. Okay, where were you on that?
Well, you know, when do you become awakened? Well, you could sit in a Jefferson High School auditorium and they would do the Pledge of Allegiance. And Black people would say, and liberty and justice for y'all. We knew then, when we were 12 and 13 years old, that we were in a racist environment. And I guess it stays with you until you can work it out.
Okay.
The reason
well, it did help. But again, let's put it this way. Just recently at Jefferson High School, in the whole issue of protesting and whatever, someone pulled the folks pulled the statue down. Remember? And there was an issue there. Okay?
I don't know the issue. I thought the issue was resolved. People in the community wanted it gone, and there was no leadership in the town to get it gone. So what do the people do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So hold on, Cliff.
Okay.
You got the floor. Go on.
Oh, no, what I'm saying, if there's no leadership, we're talking about education. And we're sending our children to institutions to teach our children what? And if there's no leadership in those institutions to educate our children, we should be concerned.
So where do we go from here at Jefferson High School?
The leadership, the school board, I don't know. There's got to be some official leadership in this town, and they're silent. I haven't heard the mayor address the issue of removing racist statues from our landscape. I haven't heard any of our politicians, our congressional representatives. I mean, the president of the United States is trying to badmouth Portland from cleaning up this racist history, and I haven't heard our federal Congress representatives respond in any way. I don't know if they want the racist statues here or not, but the people who live in these communities know they don't want them.
Okay. When you were on the show and you were talking about this same issue, had you gone around the local official, elected officials like Earl Blumenauer and let's say Ron Wyden, were they familiar with this issue?
Well, there was a brother on the school board at a time when I first brought it up. It was somebody, Alonzo. Do you remember him?
Oh, Alonzo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like we have many different opinions about what should be done is best for our community. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've got a direction yet, or a directive or any real strong leadership. The strongest leadership in the community was the group of people who organized and removed those racist symbols. And I thank God that we have that kind of initiative amongst the people to do what needs to be done. The old folks aren't going to get it done. They're tired. But to see this young group of people coming up and taking charge is refreshing. And I'm hopeful that it'll take care of itself. This nation can't continue to be as racist as it is and think it's going to survive, because it's not.
I might add too that I guess you know that the president put out an executive order. I don't know whether or not it's passed or whatever, but I understand he had an executive order that stated that he was going to make sure that these statues would not be basically pulled down or whatever, and indicated that anyone doing so would get 10 years in the federal pen, if you will. 10 years in the federal pen. And it's my understanding it was going to be retroactive, as if to say there are photos of folks who have been pulling statues down. And I thought that was a very interesting piece. And again, we're in Oregon, we're in Portland for that matter, in this community, are very interested in what's going on.
Well, we're in the United States of America.
Exactly.
Okay. And those kinds of statutes, for example, it's a simple, I think, argument or parallel. They're not going to put a statue of Adolf Hitler at a school where Jewish kids are ordered to go.
Good point.
They're just not going to do it.
Good point.
So why they allow it? Why they treat the African Americans? Why do they do that to the African Americans when we know they wouldn't do it to others? Mm-hmm. We know it, and the community wouldn't tolerate it. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't find a profile of Adolf Hitler on a coin in Germany today, or a swastika, because the people are embarrassed by their history and they cleaned it up. We're not ready to clean it up because the whole we've all been indoctrinated to abuse Black people through our educational systems, by our money. What's the most important thing? The people is their money. And if you see an oppressor of a Black person stamped on some money, what is that telling you? It's real clear. And we got billions of those images circulating every day in every cash register in your pocket. And we're looking at that. It's kind of a subliminal oppression of people and a hearty disrespect for people and their history. And, you know, what's going to happen is going to happen.
Could I chime in for a moment?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was just hoping you could provide an example of that subliminal oppression.
Well, look at a quarter. Look at a
Okay.
nickel. You look at a nickel, they have a Monticello. That is nothing but a slave prison. If you're not going to put the front door to Doc, what is it, Treblinka and Dachau and all of those places where they tortured Jews, that's not going to be printed on any nation's money. But in our nation, we print the front gates of prisons for Africans. And people don't get how offensive that might be. Does that help?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had
Okay.
just read an article, too, a while back ago saying that George Washington didn't really have wooden dentures. I don't know if you guys read that one.
Slaves, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no. It's, we're total. I mean, they never told us that Thomas Jefferson was a businessman and his business was breeding and trafficking in African slavery. And that's what Monticello was his own personal prison.
Yeah.
You know, that's all that was. He was running a private prison and for African slave labor. And I think people need to know who he is if they're going to use him as a role model. You know, and I think everybody needs to know who our nation's role models are. And all they have to look at is the faces on the money and see Jefferson, Jackson, Washington, Monticello. You know, it's our symbolism is steeped in racist ideology. And some people are just reacting to it. They've had enough of it. You know, we don't need it. We certainly don't need it in North Portland. You know, people living in North Portland, historically a Black community, you know, we want to get rid of that stuff, man. We can find something more appealing than a slave trader for statues in our community.
What leadership do you think should take the lead on this issue here in the state of Oregon?
Well, anybody on the city council, they could realize that we got a park named after George Washington, Washington Park. Make it a peace and love park. Not a park, the biggest piece of park real estate. And I don't know what the park budget is because they got rose gardens and, you know, but that's a symbol of racism. And we support that. You see the big park they got down for us on this side, Dawson Park, and then you see what they got up there on the west side. And it's the disparities are obvious. And we just have to deal with the disparities because many of us want a fair shake.
So I want to ask a question.
Go on, Brady.
Okay. So do you think it's important that when these statues come down, because there is that side of things that's going to ask, why don't we put things in a museum? Do you think that would be important so that we look at the past, we remembered some of this stuff and we don't have like a revisionist history pop up?
Well, maybe we could recycle the bronze and give it to the artists.
Yeah.
That too.
Bruce, if I've just a comment here. Part of the issue is our history has been written with a white brush. How many significant people of history that were of color, Black, Latino, Asian, Native, are in our history books? It is rare that we find anything that we talk about the full integrated history of our country. I mean,
Well,
there was controversy over having Tubman on currency to replace someone like Andrew Jackson, which to me made a logical sense. Jackson was probably one of the more racist presidents we've ever had. And yet Tubman, who all the contributions that she had running the railroad to get free the slaves out of the South, there was pushback on her achievements for what she achieved. So we've got to start by looking at what our history really is and to get a balanced history. And the other question I've asked when we talk about monuments, the commonly theory is that when countries start building monuments, it's a sign of their decline. So why are these monuments so important? There was clearly in the 20s and 30s, when the Klan was getting at its zenith, a push by different organizations, Daughters of the Confederacy being one, to put out a lot of the monuments of the Southern Civil War generals who they made as heroes. So I never quite understood that when we had a group of states that wanted to secede and divide our union all over the issue of continuation of slavery, we wanted to recognize that, why we would put up statues of that. I get the Vietnam War memorial. I get the memorials for the men and women that fought and died in the Second World War or the Korean War, or the men and women who gave their lives in Desert Storm. But to put up statues of people as if they were perfect or if they were the only perspective that we need to have for that period of time, that to me is the biggest concern. We need a balanced look at history. Were there Declaration of Independence from the monarchy of England and the suppression of the government? Yes. Were there good things that came out of that? Yes. But there were also some very evil things that came out of that, which is the continuation and support for slavery that went well beyond when it was deemed illegal or immoral in most of Europe. So we have to start with history, and part of that means to reach out to the community and to ask the community what is an appropriate name for the schools that we have. And also,
I agree with you. Now that they have taken that slave trader off the pedestal, and right in where the pedestal is, it's a memorial garden to veterans. Well, I was a wrestler at Jefferson High School when I was there, but my sparring partner, and it was a tough kid, I'm telling you, he didn't come back home from Vietnam.
Right.
And we don't even recognize the kids who died in Vietnam at that high school. And we're still celebrating the lives of these guys that, where do we weigh in? It's because it's obvious to some of us that racist slave traders should not be standing at the front door of a school that's supposed to build character for Black people. I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
Well, unfortunately, we have to get a little more recent than that. We can look at Woodrow Wilson and some of the things that he wrote.
Yeah, I agree.
To say it was racist was probably the kindest thing I could probably say about President Wilson. So yes.
I'm getting the same information, and like you say, some of our heritage go back to the Trail of Tears, and you think of Jackson and of that stuff, and we're not even dealing with the stuff that we need to deal with because it's all our history, and we got to people act like we can't have a new history or refreshing history or a proud history. History doesn't die, but there was a time we weren't writing our histories because it was illegal for people of color to go to school and learn to write. We're saying we got an oral history, that, and our oral history was before they were making records and tapes. And so we just have a lot of work to do. That's all I really see. We got a lot of work to do.
Well, let me get real quick. Like, again, it's all about that barbecue, getting together and communication and education. And I think that first step is the fact that we're having this issue right now in regards to all of the protesting. And I think we ought to keep it in that view. We're communicating. But look, we're going to be spending more time on this issue. We may invite the same folks this next time around. Okay? So look, we'll get back to you. It's been enjoyable. Enjoy your day. Again, from the Oregon Voters Digest and the crew, and also the guests, we thank you for being with us. Have a good evening. Take care.
Kerford, you've seen Dak before. Dak, who was running for city council, have him on. The idea is that he's still there. Still haven't gotten a runoff yet, so we don't know who's going to be sitting in that seat. So right now we got several folks who are still basically involved in the process. I picked Dak because I figured he's been very, very involved. He's knocked on a lot of doors and et cetera. So Jack Kerford's going to be on. Another entity that's been around has been Patrick. It's Patrick Stupel. You can see him there. There's General Pat. Anyway, Patrick has been very, very involved. He knows exactly. Like he's got his dog tags on. I know he's there. I know he's the man. So bottom line is that he's been around. He knows what these lanes are all about, downtown and elsewhere and whatever, young man and whatever, and that's what it's all about. Okay, good. And then we got Brady on another end. Brady's basically from the same. Where's that?
I was just saying hi.
Hi, Jay. Okay, Brady. Got Brady on, and Brady's basically again too. He's very familiar with downtown. You can only hear his voice as opposed to his photo, but we'll get that photo. He's been on the show. He's been on Voters Digest before. So we've got Brady. He's going to be on, and we've got Cliff Walker. And Cliff Walker is a local, very, 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 very much involved here in the community, and and by the way, he's former military, like Dak is, and myself, and whatever. And I'm recruiting.
I understand that when we start looking at the role models for tearing down statues, we just have to look at our military. The boys who were over in, was it Baghdad, taking down the statue of, was it Saddam Hussein? Now, if the military is leading the statue taking down movement in the world, what are they telling us? There is an appropriate time to act. And I think that's what we have to decide. Are we going to continue to stand by, or are we going to act? I know action isn't always beautiful, but sometimes it gets the job done.
Thank you for saying.
I really want to condemn all of the vandalism because people, I think, have taken notice that some of the vandalism is meaningful, like the George Floyd mural outside of the Apple Store. That stuff is kind of beautiful.
Just a comment here. Part of the issue is our history has been written with a white brush. How many significant people of history that were of color, Black, Latino, Asian, Native, are in our history books? It is rare that we find anything that we talk about the full integrated history of our country.
So my point is, sometimes all it really takes is for us to take off our glasses and put on someone else's. We got to see through different people's perspectives and lenses. When we do that and we have radical solidarity on the issues, we can change the world.
At the same time, the peaceful marches that I see, absolutely. That's what Reverend King did and made tremendous strides. There were other approaches that were not as successful. So as a scientist by my background, I look at analogs that work. And the question is, how do we make change that's really lasting and not just talk about it in Oregon? It's time we make real change happen.